Humanity's exploration of the stars reached a new milestone when the Odyssey spaceship detected a mysterious distress signal from the Andromeda Galaxy. Captain Elara, known for her bravery, decided to lead the mission herself, intrigued by the unknown. The signal led them to a dark, desolate planet, perpetually shrouded in shadows. As the crew landed, they were greeted by an eerie silence, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines. The landscape was barren, with remnants of an ancient alien civilization scattered across the surface. Crumbling buildings, strange symbols etched into stone, and advanced machinery now lay in ruin. The crew, though experienced, felt a growing unease as they ventured deeper into the ruins. It was as if the shadows themselves were watching, waiting. Captain Elara and her team discovered signs of a catastrophic event that had wiped out the inhabitants. The technology was far beyond anything humans had encountered before, but it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. As they examined the remains, the crew found traces of energy signatures that defied explanation. Dark energy, unlike anything they had seen. Their exploration was abruptly halted when one of the crew members, Carter, reported seeing movement in the distance. The team regrouped and advanced cautiously, their lights cutting through the darkness. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a massive shadow loomed over them. The crew froze as they realized they were not alone. Out of the darkness emerged a creature unlike anything they had ever seen, a shadow beast. It was a massive entity, its body seemingly composed of pure darkness, with only its glowing eyes visible. The creature moved silently, almost as if it were part of the shadows themselves. In a swift motion, it attacked, claiming Carter before anyone could react. Panic spread through the team, and they retreated to the ship, their minds reeling from the encounter. Back aboard the Odyssey, Captain Elara gathered her shaken crew. The message was clear. They had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. The Shadow Beasts were real, and they were the reason the ancient civilization had fallen. The crew knew they had to find out more about these creatures if they were to survive and prevent them from spreading beyond the planet. The mission had taken a deadly turn, and their fight for survival had just begun. The atmosphere inside the Odyssey was tense as the crew processed the loss of Carter, and the terrifying reality of the Shadow Beasts. Captain Elara, determined to understand what they were up against, ordered the team to review all data collected during their brief time on the planet. They had only fragments of information, but every piece was vital. The recordings from their suits showed the creature in detail, if darkness could be detailed. The Shadow Beast appeared to be a living void, absorbing all light around it, making it nearly invisible except for its faintly glowing eyes. The crew hypothesized that these creatures thrived in the darkness, feeding off energy, possibly even life force itself. Their very presence seemed to drain the light from their surroundings, creating an unnatural darkness wherever they roamed. Despite the fear that had gripped them, the crew knew they had to go back out and learn more. Captain Elara led the team again, this time armed with more advanced scanning equipment and weapons modified to emit high-intensity light, one of the few things they suspected might repel the beasts. As they stepped back onto the planet's surface, the oppressive darkness seemed even more suffocating, but they pressed on. The first encounter with the Shadow Beasts was swift and terrifying, catching the crew off guard. The team had strategically split into two groups, each with a critical mission. One group focused on gathering as much data as possible, hoping to understand the nature of these mysterious creatures. The other group scoured the ruins of the ancient civilization, searching for any remnants of technology that could provide a clue to combating the beasts. As the groups carried out their tasks, the atmosphere grew tense. The landscape was desolate, with crumbling structures and an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. The group collecting data was the first to sense something was wrong. They spotted movement in the distance, more of the Shadow Beasts, gliding silently through the ruins, their forms blending seamlessly into the darkness. The sight sent a shiver through the team as they realized the full extent of the threat they were facing. This time, they were ready. When the beasts approached, the crew activated their high-intensity light weapons, aiming directly at the creatures. The beasts recoiled, their forms flickering as if struggling to maintain their shape. But the relief was short-lived. The creatures adapted quickly, their dark forms growing denser, resisting the light. The crew retreated again, but not before managing to collect crucial data on the beasts' reactions. Back on the Odyssey, the situation was dire. The light-based weapons had only a limited effect, and the beasts were clearly more formidable than anticipated. The team's analysis confirmed that the creatures could absorb and manipulate dark energy, making them incredibly difficult to combat. Their fears were compounded by the realization that if these creatures ever left the planet, they could pose a threat not just to the crew, but to entire star systems. Captain Elara called for an emergency meeting. The crew needed a new strategy, a way to understand these creatures better, and, if possible, find a way to stop them. The mission had become a race against time, and the stakes were higher than ever. As they prepared for another sortie, the looming presence of the Shadow Beasts hung over them, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. After their harrowing encounters with the Shadow Beasts, the crew of the Odyssey returned to their ship, haunted by the creatures they had faced. The team's immediate priority was to analyze the data they had collected and try to uncover any weaknesses in the creatures or clues about their origin. In the ship's lab, scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, poring over the readings from their encounters. The creatures were unlike anything known to humanity, beings that seemed to be made of dark energy, capable of absorbing light and life force. As they delved deeper into the data, they stumbled upon a discovery that sent chills down their spines. The ancient alien civilization that once thrived on this planet had not fallen victim to an external force. They had created the Shadow Beasts themselves. Records found deep within the ruins, encoded in the alien technology, revealed a desperate attempt by this civilization to harness dark energy as a limitless power source. However, their experiments had gone horribly wrong. Instead of controlling the dark energy, they had unleashed a force they could not contain, a force that turned against them, consuming their world in shadows. Captain Elara and her crew realized the full extent of the danger. The Shadow Beasts were the result of a failed experiment, but they had evolved, becoming more intelligent and aggressive over time. The records hinted at a possible containment method, but it was vague and incomplete, likely lost in the chaos of the civilization's downfall. The crew also discovered that the creatures were not entirely invincible. The ancient records mentioned a critical flaw. The creatures' reliance on dark energy made them vulnerable to fluctuations in that energy. If the crew could find a way to disrupt the dark energy fields that the creatures depended on, they might be able to weaken or even destroy them. Armed with this new information, Captain Elara called the crew together. They had a plan, though it was fraught with risk. They would attempt to create a destabilizing pulse using the Odyssey's energy core, hoping to disrupt the creatures long enough to trap them. The team prepared for the mission, knowing that it might be their last chance to stop the Shadow Beasts before they could escape the planet and threaten the galaxy. As they readied themselves for the operation, the weight of their discovery pressed heavily on them. They were facing an enemy born of a civilization's hubris, an enemy that could potentially wipe out all life if left unchecked. The fate of their mission, and possibly of countless worlds, now depended on their success. Captain Elara and her crew knew that their mission had reached a critical point. Armed with the knowledge of the Shadow Beasts' origins and their potential vulnerability, the team gathered in the briefing room to finalize their plan. The mood was somber, the weight of their responsibility pressing down on everyone present. The task ahead was dangerous, But there was no turning back. The plan was simple in concept, but risky in execution. The Odyssey's energy core, a powerful fusion reactor, would be repurposed to emit a destabilizing pulse. This pulse was designed to disrupt the dark energy fields that the Shadow Beasts relied on, potentially weakening or even incapacitating them. However, there were many unknowns. Chief among them was whether the pulse would work as intended or if it might inadvertently make the creatures stronger. The crew spent hours fine-tuning the equipment, calibrating the pulse to the precise frequency they had determined from their analysis. Every detail had to be perfect. There would be no second chances. The engineers worked around the clock, modifying the ship's systems to handle the massive energy output required. Meanwhile, the science team ran simulations, testing the pulse's effects on the data they had gathered about the creatures. As they prepared, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. They were about to confront an enemy that had wiped out an entire civilization. The ancient records had been clear. These creatures were relentless, feeding off the very energy that sustained life. If the plan failed, not only would the crew be in grave danger, but the beasts could escape into the galaxy, posing a threat to countless worlds. The day of the operation arrived. Captain Elara addressed her crew one last time, her voice steady, but filled with the gravity of the moment. She reminded them of their duty, not just to themselves, but to humanity and all life in the galaxy. They were standing at the edge of an abyss, and their actions would determine the fate of more than just their mission. The plan required the crew to split into two teams. One team, led by Captain Elara, would venture back to the planet's surface to lure the Shadow Beasts into the trap. They would use smaller, portable energy cores as bait, drawing the creatures into the designated area where the destabilizing pulse would be activated. The second team would remain on the Odyssey, operating the ship's systems and preparing to trigger the pulse at the exact right moment. As the teams prepared to depart, the tension was palpable. Each crew member understood the risks, but they also knew the importance of their mission. They suited up, checked their equipment one last time, and headed out, ready to face the darkness. The landing was uneventful, but the eerie silence that greeted them was anything but comforting. The planet's surface, once teeming with life, was now a wasteland of shadows. The team moved quickly, setting up the portable cores and activating them. Almost immediately, the Shadow Beasts began to stir, drawn to the energy like moths to a flame. As the creatures approached, the crew could feel the temperature drop, the air growing thick with a sense of dread. The beasts, massive and terrifying in their amorphous forms, closed in on the bait. Captain Elara gave the signal, and the team retreated to a safe distance, their hearts pounding in their chests. Back on the Odyssey, the second team monitored the situation closely, their fingers hovering over the controls. As the creatures gathered around the portable cores, the moment of truth arrived. The pulse was ready, the calculations checked and rechecked. Captain Elara's voice crackled over the comms, steady and resolute. Activate the pulse. With a single command, the ship's energy core released the destabilizing pulse. The effect was immediate and profound. The Shadow Beasts writhed in agony as the pulse disrupted their dark energy fields, their forms flickering and distorting. But the creatures were not easily defeated. As the pulse continued, the beasts began to fight back, pushing against the disruption with a ferocity that shook the ground. Captain Elara and her team watched in horror as the creatures began to adapt, their forms stabilizing even under the assault of the pulse. The plan was working, but not as expected. The beasts were weakening, but not fast enough. The crew had to make a split-second decision: either retreat and abandon the mission, or push the Odyssey's core beyond its limits, risking everything to ensure the beasts were destroyed. With grim determination, Captain Elara made the call. They would push the core, even if it meant sacrificing the ship. The pulse intensified, the energy levels climbing to dangerous heights. The ship's systems strained under the load, alarms blaring as the core approached critical levels. Finally, the tipping point was reached. The pulse surged, blasting through the dark energy fields with a final, devastating wave. The Shadow Beasts, unable to withstand the onslaught, began to disintegrate, their forms collapsing into nothingness. The ground beneath them shook as the last of the creatures vanished, leaving behind only a faint residue of their existence. The crew, exhausted and battered, watched in silence as the darkness lifted. The mission had been a success, but at a great cost. The Odyssey's core was critically damaged, and the ship itself was barely holding together. They had won, but they would need to act quickly to survive. As they prepared to return to the ship, Captain Elara took a moment to reflect on what they had achieved. They had faced an unimaginable threat and emerged victorious, but the journey was far from over. They had a new mission now, to return home and warn the galaxy of the dangers lurking in the shadows. The Odyssey's crew was weary but resolute as they prepared for the final phase of their mission. The Shadow Beasts had been weakened, but the battle had taken a heavy toll on the ship and its crew. The energy core, pushed to its limits, was critically damaged, leaving the ship barely operational. Despite their exhaustion, the crew knew they had to finish what they started. The threat of the Shadow Beasts had to be completely neutralized before they could consider returning home. Captain Elara gathered her remaining crew for one last briefing. The Shadow Beasts, though gravely weakened by the destabilizing pulse, were not entirely eradicated. Some of the creatures had managed to retreat into the deepest, darkest parts of the planet's surface, where the light couldn't reach. The crew had one chance to finish them off before they could recover and adapt once again. The plan was risky. They would use the last of the Odyssey's energy reserves to create a focused, high-intensity light burst. This burst, combined with a secondary destabilizing pulse, would be powerful enough to obliterate the remaining beasts. However, this final effort would drain the ship's systems completely, leaving them stranded on the planet. It was a gamble, but one they had to take. The crew worked tirelessly to reconfigure the ship's systems for this final strike. Engineers rerouted every available power source to the energy core, while scientists fine-tuned the pulse frequency to maximize its effectiveness. Every crew member knew their role, and they moved with a grim determination, fully aware of the stakes. As they made their final preparations, the darkness outside the ship seemed to grow thicker, as if the planet itself sensed the impending confrontation. The Shadow Beasts, though diminished, were still a formidable presence, lurking just beyond the reach of the ship's lights. The tension in the air was palpable, but Captain Elara's calm, steady leadership kept the crew focused on the task at hand. The moment of truth arrived. The Odyssey's systems hummed with the energy of the reconfigured core, ready to unleash its final, devastating burst. Captain Elara gave the order, and the ship's lights blazed to life, piercing the darkness like a blade. Simultaneously, the destabilizing pulse was activated, sending ripples of disruptive energy through the atmosphere. The Shadow Beasts reacted immediately, their forms flickering and distorting under the assault. This time, however, there was no escape. The concentrated light and pulse overwhelmed the creatures, tearing through their dark energy fields and disintegrating their bodies. The beasts, once feared as unstoppable monsters, were reduced to nothingness, their essence dissolving into the air. The crew watched in awe as the last of the creatures vanished, leaving the planet's surface eerily quiet. The Shadow Beasts were gone, their threat finally extinguished. But the victory came at a cost. The Odyssey's energy reserves were completely depleted, and the ship was now powerless, adrift in the dark, hostile environment. Captain Elara and her crew knew that they had accomplished their mission, but they were now faced with a new challenge: survival. The ship's life support systems were running on emergency power, and they had limited time to find a solution. As they floated above the desolate planet, they sent a final transmission to Earth, detailing their victory and their predicament. Mission accomplished, but our situation is critical. We have neutralized the threat, but we are stranded. This is Captain Elara of the Odyssey. We await rescue. The message was sent, and the crew settled in for what could be a long wait. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but their journey was far from over. As they drifted in the void, they took solace in the knowledge that their actions had saved countless lives and ensured that the Shadow Beasts would never threaten the galaxy again. For now, they would wait, their hope pinned on the distant stars.